Welcome to the WTR Healthcare Happenings podcast. I'm your host, Tim Gerdeman, Vice Chair and Co-founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Water Tower Research. In today's podcast episode, I'm joined by Rick Pierce, CEO of Decoy Therapeutics, NASDAQ ticker symbol DCOY. Also joining us is my Water Tower Research Healthcare Analyst, Robert Sassoon. Decoy is a preclinical stage biotechnology company that is leveraging machine learning and AI tools alongside high-speed synthesis techniques to rapidly design, engineer, and manufacture peptide conjugate drug candidates that target serious unmet medical needs. The company's initial pipeline is focused on respiratory viruses and GI cancers. So without further ado, let me welcome Rick and Robert to today's podcast.
Tim, thank you for having me.
Good morning, Tim, and good morning, Rick.
Good morning.
So, Rick, let me start by asking you to tell our listeners about your professional background, including that you and I overlapped, I see, at Lehman Brothers. And
Yes.
please provide a little history on Decoy Therapeutics to include a 30,000-foot overview of where the company stands today.
Terrific. So my background, I did pre-medical in school and college, and then went to Wall Street for 15 years and really worked primarily serving biotech and pharma clients in sales, trading, and then banking at Lehman Brothers with Fred Frank. So um, the company Decoy was founded about 5 years ago by my colleagues and myself. My background, I've started or been involved with founding a number of biotech companies, which now this will be the fifth public company. The last one we sold to Pfizer after getting a drug approved in Europe and filed in the US, and the company was bought out. So we founded the company 5 years ago with a professor from MIT, Brad Pentalute, to really focus on streamlining the process by which peptide conjugate-based drugs are made. And probably some of the best known peptide conjugate drugs are drugs like Zepbound and Wegovy for weight loss. But we had a vision during COVID of taking that same methodology and applying it toward respiratory viruses. And today we have a very exciting company that is catching a lot of attention from investors.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Rick, for that overview, and I'll turn it over to Robert to ask some questions.
Okay, thanks, Tim, and Rick. It's good to have you on this podcast. So let me start by asking you to run through your business model and highlight the key factors that differentiate Decoys from other early-stage biotechs.
Sure. So I would say probably the biggest differentiators are the team, highly experienced drug hunters, combined with an academic co-founder who designed one of the world's fastest peptide or the world's fastest peptide synthesizer, and taking that technology to really solve a problem, and that is coming up with new drugs for respiratory diseases where a single drug could be used across a wide variety of viruses in a family or even in multiple viral families. Our business model is really quite different in that because we use machine learning, AI, rapid synthesis techniques to make our drug candidates for early testing, we're able to get a drug into the clinic, a lead drug identified within, say, 4 to 6 months, maybe less, and then a lead drug into the clinic to do a human challenge study. And those challenge studies only last. You do a phase 1 and then a proof of concept phase 2A. And the entire process is done at a CRO in London called hVivo. And that process lasts about 1 year. So you can, with 6 months for design, a year for tox, and a year for proof of concept phase 2 human trials, you can pretty much, within about a 70% certainty, know whether or not your drug is going to work in humans. So that's the one thing we like about respiratory drugs and vaccines is once they've gone through that phase 2 challenge study, you've got about a 70% rate of approval according to a Nature paper published a few years back.
Got it. So looking ahead, does Decoy aim to evolve into a fully integrated developer and commercializer of peptide conjugate therapeutics, or primarily operate as a platform company that out-licenses its candidates or manufacturing capabilities? And additionally, what criteria guide the decision which programs you would advance internally versus pursuing out-licensing opportunities?
Those are all great questions. I think First and foremost, we live in a wonderful time in which small companies can really behave like large companies, and that allows our business model to really be a hybrid model by which, under certain circumstances, we would absolutely outsource a program, and in other circumstances, we would keep a program. And what the key factors behind what would make us leverage a partnership and outsource something might be, we might do a co-development deal, let's say, in flu, COVID, and RSV, because in the United States, we might be able to distribute that drug very simply through, CVS or Amazon Pharmacy or Walmart Pharmacy, where drugs can actually be sold off a website with a prescription and picked up or delivered to your home in larger cities very simply. But from a global perspective, we would probably partner a drug if we were going into places like Europe or even further afield. You'll hear about how we would partner with the Gates Foundation and some of their pharmaceutical partnerships. So hybrid model, how we think about keeping something versus partnering it really depends upon the distribution model. I think what you're seeing today is really fascinating. Companies like Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk are actually distributing their drugs off their own websites today, direct to consumer. So we kind of predicted that 3 years ago. We were saying, hey, we're going to distribute on our own. A lot of the respiratory antivirals we're developing, we're discovering will have home test kits, so you can, right away whether you've got RSV, COVID, or the flu. You get online, talk to your doctor, they write a prescription, and bang, it can be delivered to your door in a couple of hours. That didn't exist 5 or 6 years ago. So you're now seeing pharma cutting out those PBMs and going direct. So that's very exciting for us. What would differentiate it is if we couldn't leverage that model, we would want a pharma partner at a large detail sales force that could go after sort of the primary care world. And to do that, you'd need to partner with the GSKs, the Pfizers, the AstraZenecas, the really large players in our space.
Thanks for that. It'll be interesting to get your input into this question. You will talk about AI and machine learning. How are they actually specifically being deployed in the platform that you have? I think is the Impact platform, where it has where has it demonstrably reduced time or cost versus conventional methods?
Sure. So we have designed what we call design, build, test loop, where we use a number of programs which may be physics-based, structurally based, looking at docking of peptides to their targets, things like DeepMind's software package that was, again, only developed a few years ago, and then some of our own proprietary scripts and software. And what we do is we will rapidly design a drug against an alpha helical target that is a virus. And what we do, the reason why we can do what we do successfully is we are only focusing on 250 viruses comprising of 11 viral families that all share the same fusion invasion, which means we're going after a very, very highly conserved mechanism of action by which those viruses invade a person's healthy cells. And so we're basically coming up with master keys to block that invasion process, if you will. So they're called decoys. So we create these decoys that block the structural binding of that virus to a healthy cell. And we do that by using machine learning, some AI. So we design them in the computer. We might make 50,000 molecules to come up with 10 designs that we like, that we then would go test in pseudotype or live virus assays. If we see that there are qualities that we'd like to improve upon, we put that information back in the computer. So what happens is we actually can tell you how much a drug candidate will cost before we make it. We can tell you what it looks like, what the components will be. So we can make that drug. You typically design it within a week or two. and then we go through a refining, sort of a refining process by which we design it. We print it out using high-speed peptide synthesizers in our lab, send it out for testing at places like Harvard Medical School or Fort Detrick and other places that have live viruses and BLS4 labs. And then we get back the tests and we see where we might need to improve. And then we basically write code that would help improve that and put it back in. Where we really retain a lot of value is that final data set that we're continually building. The machine gets smarter and smarter. So the next time it sees something that we want to improve on, it automatically improves on it. So it goes right to that, goes back to the loop where it should improve and it will improve on it. So what it does, what we can do is save a lot of time in the lab. We save a lot of chemicals by not actually making those drugs. And 5 years ago, to make one of these drugs took us 9 months. Today, we can do it in less than a day. So we used to have to send out to a contract research lab. Today, we can make them on a desktop, machine under a fume hood and print it out and literally tested it within hours. So a lot of interest from folks like BARDA, Biological Advanced Research Development Authority, or DARPA, Department of Defense.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you've given your platform's ability to design a drug in such a short period of time. The question is Decoy's long-term value proposition centered on the pipeline assets themselves or on the platform as a service dash infrastructure that could be licensed or contracted out to third parties?
So great and interesting question. Today, we're really focused on the platform, not as a service, but as a discovery engine. But one could envision a larger pharma partner someday wanting to own this kind of a technology to be able to make lots of drugs. We are building it to make drugs for our own portfolio and to partner with others. Some of those partnerships might be co-development deals. Some of them might be just outright licensing. And in the example of one of our funders who's given us $5 million on a non-dilutive basis, Bill Gates, in the Gates Foundation case, they may find an indication that we would never have the wherewithal to commercialize because it's a very small indication, let's say like Nipah or Hendra. But one of our drugs that's commercial, might actually also work in Nipah and Hendra. And so Gates would then make that drug through one of its partners, like a Dr. Reddy's, let's say, in India, and deploy that drug directly through their own third party. We would get paid for every dose of drug sold, but we would not be involved in the distribution or manufacturing. So we're building a distributed manufacturing model under a global access commitment agreement that you'll hear about with Gates to do that. So it's pretty exciting. It allows us to get into markets we would never be able to penetrate.
Sounds very interesting. Now, as you scale your platform, how deeply is your discovery engine locked into third-party infrastructure? Meaning, if you were to move away from Google or NVIDIA, which you have associations with, would your trained models and proprietary data sets be fully portable, or is the intellectual property codependent on their specific stacks? Or alternatively, how are you building and protecting the proprietary data sets that train your AI, and machine learning models for peptide design? And what prevents a competitor from replicating similar in silico capabilities and eroding your technological edge? I know it's a lot of questions there.
No. I think it's an important question. First of all, there are really three major players in the cloud space: Google, Amazon, and NVIDIA. We have chosen to partner currently with Google, and you'll hear down the road that we're really doubling down on that relationship, as well as NVIDIA. We've been supported by them, the Inception program. But I think the critical component, if you, for instance, we're building out something with Google right now, if you had to gravitate that to somebody else's platform, it would probably cost you, I would guess, about $500,000 or less, and about 3 or 4 months of time to sort of change over the software that you're embedded, say in Google, to work on. We're already, the beauty is Amazon and Google use a lot of NVIDIA chips. They make their own chips as well, as we all know. So a lot of the software that would be run off NVIDIA chips is already embedded in our programs. If we had to go to a specific proprietary new Amazon chip or a NVIDIA chip, we would have to use people to help us, kind of gravitate onto their platforms. I would say what we would be more likely to do is, if we were embedded on, say, the Google Cloud as we are today, more so than anybody else, if we were expanding, we would expand activities into another cloud setting. But if we needed to, we can certainly move it relatively quickly. In terms of the proprietary data sets, what we are really protecting is when we do that design, build, test loop, and we learn something, we get a drug and we say, oh, this peptide is degraded by a particular enzyme in everybody's body. We need to switch that component or that peptide that's degraded, that amino acid, to a non-natural. That code is proprietary, and so that goes back into our private, what we would call proprietary data set. That's building really rapidly. That data set that we're training, the machines are training to build these drugs on, are building, rapidly. And so what isn't proprietary are things like, DeepMind, or you're using diffusion techniques or things that are sort of off the shelf, but it's that data set of very particular to what we're doing in alpha helical peptides, and alpha helical envelope viruses. We're building a database that's truly private and closed. And so that, I think, will become very valuable to somebody who wants to do what we do very fast. Otherwise, they're going to have to go and rebuild all what we're doing. And we don't share a lot of what we're doing. So it will be, not impossible, but time is money. And I think in this business, we've got a nice lead in this space.
Right. So it seems like the antiviral space is not that crowded because it's a challenging area. But what advantages does your peptide conjugate based platform offer over the limited antiviral options available today for respiratory diseases?
Sure. In the past, it would take years to fish out small molecules that were active against viruses. And when we started this, none of us were virologists. We were all drug hunters, and we had a mindset of, well, why would you limit yourself to a single virus? Why wouldn't you make an antiviral that could work against multiple viruses? And so we drilled down on something as simple as, well, why is it a viral family? Well, in envelope viruses, the reason they're a viral family is they all share the same fusion core by which they invade healthy cells. So we thought, well, that's pretty interesting. Why don't we just build a company that goes after building great structures that can block that invasion machinery and then relate it to each other? So, for instance, our triple program for flu, COVID, and RSV, we are making constructs or drugs candidates that basically fit into the target of flu, COVID, and RSV. And they're only 2 angstroms apart in terms of structural relationship. If you look at the crystallography, they're tiny differences. So if you just expand a little bit, you're covering all the targets of all three of those. So one drug has the potential to work against three major viruses. That's 70% of all viral threats out there. That, the flu, COVID, and RSV actually kill a fair amount of people globally every year. And it's not a vaccine. It can be a treatment or it can be a prophylactic. So you could take it as a nasal spray. It would potentially block you from getting flu, COVID, or RSV. If you'd already gotten the virus, within 36 hours, like a Paxlovid, you take it and it would immediately start to drop your viral loads very rapidly. So really different approach. And I think with the acquisition by Merck of Cidara recently of a small molecule fused to an antibody, I think for $9.2 billion, the world woke up and said, wow, antivirals are not sort of a low cost, boring area anymore. They're pretty exciting. So we think our approach is radically different, allows somebody to go after a single drug that can treat multiple indications. And as time goes on, we think in order to have a sort of a global drug, you're going to have a global price. And so you're going to have to be able to make affordable drugs that can be distributed to much larger audiences and that can be made relatively inexpensively in a lot of places, and peptides fit that mold. And I think the other thing that's really interesting about peptides, small molecules are too small to go after the fusion core, and antibodies are too big to get to it. Peptides are sort of the Goldilocks, just right size. So cost, ease of manufacturing, the huge amount of manufacturing capacity from China to India to the United States to Europe, it's everywhere. And you can make our products on standard equipment. You don't need anything special. So having that distributed capability is a big deal.
So you mentioned the collaboration you have with the Gates Foundation, which is, they're really social investors, really. So how does Decoy's global access commitment with the Gates Foundation shape its choices around indication selection, geographic focus, pricing, and access strategies in low, middle income countries compared with high income markets?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, Gates, Bill Gates, back I think 2 or 3 years ago, in his blog, sort of called us out, our platform out, as one of the 5 most exciting things he'd seen at his annual meeting. I think what is exciting about our global access commitment agreement is it's really a living document of how, if we come across a drug that, say, worked against RSV, but also worked against, say, Nipah and Hendra, the Gates Foundation is going to care about that drug to be able to distribute in lesser income nations, the Africas, the Indias, maybe even the Chinas. Um, and that drug may also be able to be used in very narrow indications, like a Nipah or a Hendra, where you get, a couple thousand cases a year in India. No one could make that a commercial success. But if you had a drug that worked in RSV, but also works in Nipah and Hendra, well, now that's pretty exciting because you can use it and stockpile it and use it for that purpose. From a For what will differentiate us, the product that we are developing for Gates, our lead product, is a product for COVID, but it can work as a prophylactic or as a treatment. That product will sort of demonstrate that the platform works really well for humans. And then we are developing a drug for COVID, RSV, and flu. That drug will very likely be a big commercial. I mean, it would be if Sedera got bought out for $9.2 billion for a flu antiviral. You can imagine if you had flu, COVID, and RSV together, it certainly would be exciting. Again, not a vaccine, a treatment or a protection. So it protects you 24 hours or for a week, depending on the formulation. And you really have an opportunity to take the drugs that can work across multiple viruses, some of them very small niche areas, and somebody like Gates could go after that market. We get paid if they do it, but it also provides them with a product that's different than our personal lead product, if you will, for commercial markets. Their product would be able to be distributed and through that global access commitment. We would do a licensing deal and have a transfer package. It could be made in existing facilities locally around the world. And the beauty of it is we really have a repeatable model. What I said earlier, I think is going to be true. I think you're going to have larger distribution networks going forward and sell for less, more, you're going to have a lower margin, might sell much more drug and make just as much money, but you're going to have to do that. You're going to have drugs, unlike what happened in COVID. You need to have drugs that can be distributed in Africa and Brazil and China and other places all at the same time. I mean, and there's a big interest from countries like Canada and France and Germany and to control that on their own, not to be beholden to other countries to provide those drugs for them. So I think as
Right.
biosecurity becomes more of an issue, you'll
Yeah.
see more interest. But I think you're going to have lower prices of drugs. And you're already seeing it with the GLP-1s. Lilly and Novo are dropping the prices of those drugs. And as they drop, more and more people will use them. So they'll
Yeah.
pick up the margins may go down, but the volume makes up for it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. So can you highlight Decoy's key milestones that investors should be watching out for over the next 12 to 18 months?
Sure. So we are in the process of selecting a lead candidate for our first program for the Gates Foundation, which would be a COVID prophylactic or treatment coming in. And so you'll see a lot of data, preclinical, and then going into the clinic in 2027. And as I mentioned, once that drug gets in the clinic, it's about 9 to 10 months till you get a phase 2A readout. And then you've got about a 70% chance of getting a drug approved based off of the odds for antivirals and vaccines. And then we will follow in with that product very quickly with a drug for COVID, RSV, and flu, which would obviously be a very large market on a global scale. And I think, you'll see partnerships very likely. I think pharma is starting to come around. You may see more going on with the Gates Foundation as time goes on, as that global access commitment expands. And then we have other programs that we're looking at in oncology that I think you'll probably hear more about. We've got a universal protein degrader or PROTAC program that in stealth that could create a universal PROTAC that could use peptide ligand targeting for oncology or antivirals, really for treating a lot of different kinds of
Yeah.
things.
So lots going on there. So where do you stand financially in achieving the milestones you've just outlined, and can you outline your financial strategy going forward?
Sure. So we are public, traded on NASDAQ, DCOY. We just did an initial sort of listing round. We had at year end about $12.5 million in the bank. And we are, I think, continuing to look for non-dilutive funding. We've gotten a lot of non-diluting funding from the Gates Foundation, Google, NVIDIA, the European Union, BARDA. We expect that to continue and expand that pool of non-dilutive funding. And then I think as we begin to validate what we're doing, we've begun to see pharmaceutical partners, potential partners, become quite interested in what we're doing. And I think after Sedera got bought out, we've actually gotten several large healthcare funds who've kind of inbound called us and said, "Hey, we're interested in learning more about what you're doing. You're looking for funding." So, we wouldn't be looking for funding at our current price probably, but I think as time moves on and we increase in value, we would be looking to be opportunistic.
Right. Got it.
But we
Well,
can
thanks, Rick.
fund through
Yeah, go ahead.
IND. We will fund our first program through IND, and I think we've got, we think we know where we can get it funded from a clinical perspective.
Great. Well, thanks, Rick, for
Yeah.
you've given us a really much better understanding of Decoy's business model and strategic goals, and it's your answers were pretty full. So to the questions that I asked, so I'm going to hand it back to Tim.
Well,
Thank you so much for your time today, Rick. It was great hearing about Decoy Therapeutics, and Robert, thank you for the very thoughtful questions.
yeah. Thank you both. It's great. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, as well as visiting www.watertowerresearch.com to stay up to speed on the company's small cap written research reports, podcasts, fireside chats, industry-specific symposiums, and conference schedules. We will see you next time for another edition of the WTR Healthcare Happenings podcast. Finally, a special thanks to the producer and editor of the podcast, Krista Fitzpatrick.